Oh.
Okay, that's a new one. We didn't do that before. So Lorena and I are really excited to continue our ICBG seminar series. This is the second in what we hope will be many this year and next. And both from a personal and professional level, we felt that with what has been happening over the last few decades and the intensity of debates and discussions within the public sector right now, it was important to take a look back at how racisms are manifesting in Britain and the tensions it's creating and how that's inhibiting but also facilitating solidarity between different groups in the third sector and elsewhere. And one thing we want to do is think about how we can apply knowledge to real world problems and move it outside just academic intellectual discussions and bridge the gap between researchers, academics, community organizations and the community, and make sure the community is at the heart of what's happening. So I'm a sociologist and an outreach worker at Himaya Haven, which is a non-profit that supports prisoners' families. And my work is another reason why Lorena and I felt this was an important event to undertake, where we can start facilitating discussions that hopefully lead to action and not just more and more discussions. And Lorena, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sorry about that. Yeah, yes, I'm Maureen, and I'm an academic. I work at a university in the Northwest, but I also have experience, quite a lot of years working with communities, public sector organizations, health and social care around issues of inclusion, diversity and inclusion, around integration of migrants. And from my work as well, and also experiences, it's really disheartening to see how even in public policy, racism manifests and also racial hierarchies happen when it comes to funding, when it comes to the focus of local authorities, because I worked for a local authority. So the dissemination of resources was based on their perception of who is in most need. And there always seemed to be an issue of there's only one space and only one ethnic minority group can fill that space at a time. So Somi and I've had sort of similar experiences in our professional lives and also in our personal lives, which has really sort of galvanized us to do the seminar plus everything else that's going on. I think these are really important conversations we need to be having and engaging with. Thank you. So I guess to start, I know these are things that we already know, but it's just a reminder that please can you keep your mics on mute, and then if you're speaking, just unmute. If you want to have your video on, your camera on, that's fine. If not, that's also fine. Oh, apologies. Yeah. So that's also fine. And just a reminder that if you raise your hand, you've got a comment, a question, you can put it in the chat. You can unmute yourself, or you can, before you do that, you can use the icons at the bottom soon to raise your hand. And please, this is a space for us to have genuine discussions, to challenge each other, to really think through about what is going on and how we can come together and work together in effective ways. And also recognizing our diverse experiences. So it's also about respecting each other's views, respecting each other's experiences, and looking at how we can come together and work together and appreciate what other people bring to the table. So that's in terms of our ethos, and obviously all are welcome. Feel free to participate. We really want to make this seminar interactive. So it's not just us and our guests talking, it's also as participants, we really value your experiences and your views. So feel free to participate as well.
Right, so as you will have known from our Eventbrite description, there's 4 overarching aims that are framing the seminar today. We really want to reflect on and discuss issues encompassing solidarity between different ethnic and racial groups, and how that solidarity can be utilized to not just react against the entrenched racial inequalities we see, but also lead to change and galvanize groups, because there's a sense that groups and communities are becoming disheartened, especially with the current reports that have come out from the government and the emphasis from the government on the idea that institutional racism is no longer an issue within the framework of Britain, which we all know is not true. We also want to take a look at how we can heighten and foster allyship and solidarity, and how that's hindered by the hierarchies of racism that have been reinforced within groups and across. And again, as Lorraine said, we welcomed differing opinions and views and perspectives. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
So overview of this event. So Somi and I are just going to talk just for a few minutes to provide context, just to kind of set the foundation. And then we're going to have Mohammed, who's going to speak for 15 minutes and then have 10 minutes Q&A, and then have a break. And it's Friday and it's almost end of day, and people have been working since morning, so just take a 5-minute break. And then have performance from Martin. And again, with also a 10-minute Q&A, and then have discussions and reflections, where we then come back and give feedback, and then we conclude for the day. So I think before we start, it's quite important to, like I say, to set the foundation, to just help us think about what's coming with some of the presentations from our guests, and we really appreciate them coming here. We know they've got other things to do, they're busy people. What I'd like you to think about as they're talking is also to be reflecting on what they're talking about in regards to issues of whether it's race, racial hierarchy, solidarity, and thinking about what that means, allyship. So to set the scene around exploring and understanding different ways of diverse racisms and racial hierarchies enacted within Britain today is really to think about how notions of race and racism and racial hierarchies in the UK, in Britain, are linked to historical events. So we know colonialism, issues of the empire. So we're not talking about experiences that are just happening now, but how they, you know, are based on those historical events, historical things that happened around, like I said, colonialism. So I think that's very, very important. And when we talk about racisms and racial hierarchies, is to think about racisms, as you can see, we've put it as plural, not just about racism. So we need to think about how notions of race have changed, therefore also evolved in terms of racial identities and how people are racialized, and also how they experience racism. We talk about anti-Muslim hate, we talk about, you know, Islamophobia, we talk about anti-Semitism, we talk about all this cultural racism. We need to think about them as racisms and how they enacted. I like what Ghana says around social relationships, that racisms are produced in social relationships, and also the dynamics, the power dynamics that shape those social relationships. So I want you to think broadly around racisms, how they enacted through social relationships, through power dynamics, through institutions and structures and systems. And then so that when we think about solidarities, we're thinking about them within that context of the historical, within the context of racisms, within the context of racialized identities, and within the context of these notions of race. As you can see, just pick one on Twitter that we copied, this is in the public domain, around labor. That's an example of what's happening when we talk about racial hierarchies, with what's happening in the Labour Party, and issues of Labour Muslims and issues of anti-Semitism. So these are current issues that we know are actually happening now. Yeah, so.
Yeah, and another thing we do want to emphasize is that whilst we are focusing on Britain, we recognize that in the transnational global communities we live in, that we can't ignore what's happening globally, nationally, and how that impacts Britain. So contemplating how, for example, the death of George Floyd and how that murder prompted further Black Lives Matter protests and the ripple effects of that both transnationally and at a local level, how it reinforced the realities of institutional racism and the impact it has on lived experience, how the ripple effects of that also brought, for example, issues of colorism and racism, both on a binary and non-binary lens, back to the forefront of public discussions, but also how the reactions to this have to a degree been artificial. So with the Black Lives Matter protests, we had issues around colorism gaining media attention, which led to a number of corporations who own skin lightening products rebrand some of the brands. So for example, Unilever, who own Fair and Lovely, have changed that product label to Glow and Lovely. But what does that mean? What material change is that leading to on the ground? Nothing. So how can we move away from symbolic, artificial reactions and change and actually create material change? And how is that impacted by the transnational global communities that we have today? Hilary?
And also that then links to the focus on whiteness, white privilege. I think an interesting article was written by Dr. Muna Abdi on use of language. So we cannot have these conversations without also talking about the discourse on race and whiteness, white supremacy, and white privilege. So I think it's also important to think about how those binaries are created, issues of power, and how that has an impact on our ideas on allyship, because that is one of the concepts that's been thrown about, and also solidarity. What is the impact? What is it that we need to be thinking about in regards to these concepts and ideas and issues of power? So this kind of frames our discussion. So it is also kind of, it frames how we're going to think about issues of solidarity, think about the tensions and the barriers that's stopping different ethnic groups or racial groups and communities working together.
And another thing it's important to bear in mind is that the tensions and shifts that exist when it comes to identity categories and also systems that are used to police and categorize those who are positioned as non-white, and the shifts that have occurred within the framework of Britain. So for example, that in the 70s and 80s, political blackness, the category of black was used as a form of solidarity. It was political alliance between, for example, South Asian and African and Caribbean communities to forge an anti-racist stance to protest against institutional racism. But the fact that in the 1990s, political blackness was more and more problematized by academics, politicians, and activists, and that led to the fragmentation and the declining popularity of the term. And then we had Black emerge as a category to specifically refer to, for example, African Caribbean communities, and then British Asian to refer to those whose families migrated from Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. But the fact that then with 9/11, we had these identity categories in lived experience further fragment, and we saw tensions within the groups as communities wanted to identify as British, Pakistani, Indian, and the symbolism of why matters. But also the fact that this fragmentation in the everyday isn't reflected by the categories used by the government, but also when applying for funding, the tensions this causes are quite significant. And Lorraine, if you want to highlight.
It's also important to highlight when we talk about British Black. I am a migrant. I've lived in this country for 20 years and I'm from an African country. So we know that Black as a racial category still exists, but this, and it refers to, when we talk about British Black, is people of African descent. And we know that in censuses, even some employment in terms of EDI categories, they use, British Black, African, Afro-Caribbean. But one of the things that we don't think about, don't recognize, and which we need to engage with is the new African diaspora, those that are limited by immigration status, and thinking about those tensions and thinking about their experiences. That some categories then homogenize groups of people, we get Black African, when we know that Africa is a continent. And there are different cultures, languages, and ethnicities. And we need to recognize those differences because they are important when we start talking about those building bridges and working in solidarity. And also thinking about, like I said, it also talks about Black British as people of Afro-Caribbeans. So it's interesting that these categories homogenize groups of people, but don't recognize the nuances, not just based on ethnicity or race. We also need to engage with issues of class, and all the other categories, so the protected categories, sexuality, gender, and all these ideas that we need to engage with them. And we need to then have conversations that are not very overarching, but recognize those nuances. And then the last one is on BAME, which I'm sure some of you might know about, that these people have been pushing back around the use of BAME, which is Black, Asian, minority ethnics. And again, how it homogenizes groups of people. And the government has stipulated that they will no longer be using the category BAME. But as Soumya said, what does it mean in regards to real life experiences, to impact on the ground? What does it mean for those groups of people when we're talking about those identities and individuals having diverse identities that are not only based on race and ethnicity? So also these are some of the points we'd like you to think about. So, don't know if we have a 5-minute break, I would like to continue and have Mohammed, since we started a bit later.
Yeah, I think we go with Mohammed, Loreen, and then we can have the break after.
Then we can have the, oh, sorry, I must have skipped. Yeah.
Right.
So, okay, Mohammed, I'll just introduce you. If there's anything I leave out, please do let me know. So our next speaker is going to be Mohammed, who is a human rights lawyer whose work history and experience supporting those in need have led in emphasizing the need for words to be matched by action. So there's emphasis on action. And also he will talk about some of the groups and the work he's done, and both by individuals and groups. This is why he undertakes as much work pro bono as possible. He feels that for actual change to occur, one cannot just sit back and criticize. So again, going back to action, enough talking, we need to really go, get to it. So Mohammed, I'll just share your slides.
Can we have number 1, please?
Yeah.
Sorry, number 2.
Okay. So, okay.
Number 2, please. Thank you.
Oh, I don't know why it's not clicking on. Oh, it's opening in Google Docs. Not sure what's going on. Okay, just give me a second.
Whilst that's uploading, good afternoon, everyone. I don't think that I can in any way, shape or form be considered to be equal with the very many important academics and activists and writers who are sharing this particular platform this afternoon. I'm going to be the unpopular person, and the reason why I say that is because, with no disrespect or exception to the introduction to this particular lecture or media interaction, 90% of what has been said in the introduction has completely gone over my head. The acid test has to be that can the average person understand what's been said in the last 10 minutes? And in my view, I don't think the average person on the street would understand sociological or philosophical concepts of racial hierarchies and so forth. And in the course of my presentation, I want to prove, or I want you to consider other ways of looking at this particular concept or view or expression. To begin with, I want you to consider very simple definitions of solidarity. I've given you a nice example. We have allegedly the word solidarity is derived from the French language. and it means a communion of interests and responsibilities and mutual responsibility. In the legal sense, we go back into Roman law, in accordance with the Roman law of obligations. Solidarity could mean unlimited liability of each individual member within a family or other community to pay common debts, was characterized as obligatio in solidum. And then we have an example of a political definition of solidarity. And I think this was a very famous one, where in the Conservative Manifesto of 2010, part of the cultural discourse is or was, we are all in this together. And then as this is to a certain extent or degree a discussion concerning sociologists, or a discussion which has been started by two sociologists, we have Emil Durkheim, who in his view takes the view that in the legal sense, solidarity could mean the expression of the conscience collective. I'm not particularly keen on the word solidarity. I don't think it's universal, and I will tell you my reason why. One can argue that Black Lives Matter has resulted in solidarity amongst people who are anti-racist. But equally, there's going to be a solidarity of people who think that they or a group or a government or a policy is not anti-racist. So I think one thing that sociologists and philosophers and writers and journalists and authors and the rest of it, what they fail to realize, that where you have one section of people in solidarity, you're going to have as a direct result another group of people in solidarity against them. And that's been very clearly played out in the recent political discourse with cultural wars and woke and that kind of thing. My particular preference over solidarity can be found in Kropotkin. Kropotkin wrote an interesting book called Mutual Aid, and I prefer this definition of mutual aid over solidarity. What did Kropotkin say in his introduction to his book, Mutual Aid? And he said, love, sympathy, and self-sacrifice certainly play an immense part in the progressive development of our moral feelings. But it is not love, not even sympathy, upon which society is based in mankind. It is the conscience, be only at the stage of an instinct of human solidarity. It is the conscious recognition of the force that is borrowed by each man from the practice of mutual aid, of the close dependency of everyone's happiness upon the happiness of all, and of the sense of justice or equity, which brings the individual to consider the rights of every other individual as equal to his own. I take the view that solidarity doesn't confer rights. I'm going to agree with Kropotkin in that, and I will repeat that last sentence again. Everyone's happiness upon the happiness of all, and of the sense of justice or equity, which brings the individual to consider the rights of every other individual as equal to his own. If we can move on to the second slide, please. The one particular concern I have with the solidarity argument is this. In my view, and in my opinion, visible solidarity is more important than institutional or structural change. Let me give you a few examples. Only last week did the German Football Federation or the like decide to light up a football stadium in Munich to shame or indeed reveal that certain laws in Hungary were not compatible to the LGBTI community. The Black Lives Matter has been very visible with respect to T-shirts and symbolisms with raise fists and so forth. Climate change is another example where we have lots of visibility. In my view, visibility is an easy way out. And I will give you my reasons. Let's take, for example, football and cricket. Whatever crimes have been committed in the past and to the present day with respect to racism in football, by simply taking the knee is not going to change attitudes. Racism in football campaigns are now maybe 20 to 30 years old. And in my view, institutions who have inadequately addressed issues of racism in football have found taking the knee as an easy way out. For example, in a recent cricket match, the national team wore T-shirts, and the consumer is led to accept or believe by institutions who are compelling their national teams to wear T-shirts would then absolve their inadequate treatment and dealing with eradicating racism. In my view, visibility ought to come in books and articles. It's not surprising that the public are very quickly led into visible solidarity and not actual written solidarity. Let me give you an example, and this may be a very controversial view or point. Mr. Holding has been congratulated, has won awards for an interview he gave last year on Sky News. The liberal chatting classes have even gone to the extent of wanting those who can confer a knighthood to Mr. Holding because of what he said last year. And clearly he has benefited from the speech that he gave last year by promoting his most recent book on Black Lives Matters and taking the knee and rising and so forth on morning TV programs this week. But all said and done, the acid test will be that once visibility has gone and Black Lives Matter, racism in sport is no longer visible, how much credence, reliance, importance will those that are making decisions give to Mr. Holding's view, or indeed ensure that what he has written becomes part of the narrative? And this is where I think the institutions have been very smart, because in my view, structural and institutional change is more important than visible change. And everyone's completely missed the point.
I think he's frozen. We've lost him there.
The magic of technology. Hopefully he'll find his way back.
It was really interesting and really paying attention. Just give him a minute or two. I guess people can reflect on what he said so far, and then we can have questions and comments for him. Hopefully he will be back.
The flip side of technology.
Yeah, I think we've completely lost him.
Okay, give it a minute. Hopefully he'll come back through the waiting room.
And while we wait, I think it's raised really some very interesting points around, in terms of introduction, what we talked about, and his standpoint on solidarity, his standpoint on visibility and action. So I think they're really important points to discuss. I mean, if he can come back, he's really given us quite a few points for us to have discussions about. Any comments so far? Any views, any comments while we wait?
It's a shame me and you can't break out into song.
Oh, he's back. Yeah. Yeah,
Has he come back on?
yeah, I just seen him. I admitted him in. I'm just looking because I'm sharing the screen. I can't see so many people. Oh yeah, we can see you, but I think you're on mute.
Right, am I back? Sorry
Yes.
about that. Just completely thrown me off the system. Clearly somebody doesn't like what I'm saying. So can I continue?
Yes,
Yeah.
please. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was saying that for me, institutional and structural change is a lot more meaningful, relevant, and important than those that think that visible solidarity is more important. I accept, however, there is a caveat that to raise awareness is important, but there's a difference between raising awareness and falling for the trap of visible solidarity. And I will attempt to prove my point. We can go on to the next stage. Solidarity declining conditions. Bauman wrote an important book about ethics, and his seminal work was ethics in the world of consumers, or people in the new consumer world. And there's a very relevant and meaningful quotation in Bauman's book. He argues that the society of consumers has been accompanied by a decline in the conditions necessary for the existence of solidarity today. And this ties in with my earlier points that I think, in my view, that racial hierarchies, solidarity, other sociological concepts have only become now the preserve of the academic world, the political world, the think tank world, and so on. Ordinary people on the street, A, don't understand, or B, they don't really care. But the reason why I think Bauman is important, because I think there is an inextricable link between visible solidarity and consumerism. And I'll argue this point later, but let me give you an example. If I was to buy No Racism in Sport t-shirt, or a band, or a baseball cap, and I show the world that I'm supporting a particular campaign, or I am demonstrating or protesting against inequality, by virtue of me acquiring paraphernalia of that particular cause, would make me a consumer. And this is why I think those that do not want to change institutionally or structurally are far happier engaging activists in the visible solidarity world, because that is something which they can control through consumerism. And as a consequence, it lets them off the hook because they're still not required to change institutionally or indeed make any structural changes. If we can move on to the next slide, please.
Can you just say 3 minutes left? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm going to crack on. So racism in cricket. I was recently engaged in a major discrimination case against England and Wales Cricket Board. It's the second most popular sport in the UK. Over 500,000 people click online with a cricket search in the United Kingdom. Last year, just under 300,000 people were playing sport in cricket in the United Kingdom. There's 3,000 cricket clubs in England and Wales, 21 BAME complainants to the Equality and Human Rights Commission. That's less than 2 cricket teams. And out of the 21 that complained or asked the England and Wales Cricket Board to investigate racism in cricket, there were 0 BAME individuals who made that particular complaint or were involved with that particular complaint. I can now prove statistically that there isn't any solidarity in cricket. Lots of people backed Mr. Holding. They said wonderful things about Mr. Holding. They're promoting Mr. Holding's book. Yet where it matters, i.e. in the institutional or structural sense, in the whole of England and Wales, 21 people complained. And therefore, my thesis or my hypothesis is that solidarity does not work. It is visible solidarity which is more important than people wanting structural or institutional change. Although I've been very doomy and gloomy in the last 10 or 12 minutes, I would like to finish with a little bit of hope. There was a wonderful book written by Arundhati Roy, The Infinite Algebra of Justice. And in the foreword of that particular book, and if we can have my last slide, there's a wonderful quotation from one of my favorite writers, John Berger. I'll allow you to read carefully what Mr. Berger said, because I think what he has said is very meaningful. I think it's very important. And I hope that if we can have, at least for a minute or two, solidarity on this particular quotation from Mr. Berger, and if people actually understand what he is trying to say, I take the view that for the purposes of today's presentation, institutional change, structural change is more important, more relevant than visible solidarity. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Mohammed. That was really fantastic. Thank you for challenging us. We've all been taking notes. Really key points that you've raised around visibility and actual change on the ground, impact on institutions. So this is where we have 10 minutes. If people would like to share comments, counter arguments as well, questions for Mohammed, please do so now. I mean, you can raise a hand, unmute yourself and ask the question. You can put that in the chat. That's also possible. So any questions, comments, feedback, anything else?
I do have a good friend online, Mr. Duncan Stone, who's a very famous writer. You might want to ask him because he's got a very famous book coming out next year on the history of class cricket, and he's a brilliant sociologist. I suspect he would have been in a much better presenter of this type of discussion than myself. What do you think, Duncan? Do you think visible solidarity is really taking people off track? And as a consequence, we're going to have less structural and institutional change. What would be your view, Duncan?
We'll start with apologizing on Mohammed's behalf for picking on you.
I'm not sure the microphone on my laptop.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, because people complain my microphone's too quiet. There was an awful lot you squeezed in there, and that was brilliant. And I agreed 100%. You covered so much, and I jotted down various things in relation to, like, you know, symbolism versus, well, that's the earlier stuff, symbolism versus material change. But having spent the best part of 12 years researching the book that will be out next year, and if you ask any other historian who's ever studied institutions, British or otherwise, cultural and structural change is all but impossible. Certainly, the more national or international they become. I don't think we've got much chance of changing the ECB or its attitude without some sort of legislative change. Bit of a cliche, but you know, in Scandinavia, they seem to be ahead of the game here, and their football association has to reflect at a board level the constituency that it governs, which means predominantly a greater proportion of women at a board level. So I think participation rates of women in football, soccer in Scandinavia is much higher than here. Whatever the proportion is, that's the proportion that has to be represented on the national board. Now, you know, the ECB in its previous incarnation, the MCC, was essentially a private gentleman's club only a generation ago. And that change was was all but forced on them by the fact that the rest of the world, you know, it became untenable. I'm not sure where I'm going with this, but there's, again, I think the visibility thing was interesting in that you have to start somewhere. And my own journey in doing my master's in sociology at 32 years of age, and then doing a PhD in history, you know, I was completely ignorant of racism. I will be guilty of saying grossly inappropriate stuff myself in the past because of pure ignorance, you know. And what I cover in the book is that the hegemony, to use a sociological, is so complete in this country. Notions of Englishness, especially where cricket is concerned, are so completely dominated by a white middle and upper class perspective. And this comes into notions of whiteness as well. Working class white people don't have much of a say in how people view us from outside. You know, the actual chances we've got of forcing any kind of structural change has to come, I think, legislatively. But that's, conversely, that's where visibility is important, because we're going to have to go through a very long-winded democratic process before we get to the point that they're at in Scandinavia. Again, I think you mentioned the written word, and I'm very pleased to say that my friend Crouchy reminded me that he witnessed racism against some of our South Asian players by an opposing team. And he actually went to the trouble to write to the league and forced essentially the umpires to, well, they walked out of the meeting because they obviously felt very seen at that point. So there are, but again, these are just individual acts which sadly don't amount to much at the end of the day. So as much as we can criticize the visibility and the distinction between being a consumer and an outright activist, and I've argued in the past that historians in particular need to be activists, not just worrying about where the next funding bid's coming from and getting a book contract. It has to be for a purpose. And this is why I'm sorry to say, I'm glad I'm not an academic anymore. I mean, it was forced on me by being made redundant, but you're not going to get me back in there. Not for all, because it's too stressful. A lot of it's, and sorry, I find personally a lot of historical research output to be so parochial, it's utterly useless. It's just going to gather dust mites. We need to, if we're going to exert our academic energies to anything, it has to be there has to be an end goal beyond a contract renewal. Now, this might be very difficult when you've got a mortgage and everything hanging over you, and children to feed, etc. But, you know, again, one academic at a time, or like a group getting, like today, groups of like-minded academics and specifically informed outsiders, if I can call Mohammed that, and I suppose I'm an outsider now, is incredibly important. So I think academic activism is essential, but again, the culture war and, you know, Michael Gove, you know, we've had enough of experts, haven't we? So we are now fighting a broader wave of anti-intellectualism that's been waged by the Murdoch media empire for the last 30 years. We're up against it, which makes the academic activism all the more important, and working hand in hand with the communities who we want to help. Again, I'll just finish with, I think, for me, the conclusion of my book is that obviously racial discrimination and the fact that it's classism within cricket, they're two sides of the same coin. But if we're going to create, sorry, Mohammed, solidarity in a general sense that people understand it, I think we need to talk in the broadest terms possible. So I think in order to, you know, take the racial dimension out of things, we need to unite people of a class or an economic position who are, you know, the whole culture war thing that came out this week, you know, blaming white privilege. You know, how can I even say that with a straight face? I personally think class is the most helpful, for all its complications and various definitions. I think that's the most helpful thing in bringing people of different groups together, because it is the common denominator at the end of the day. And although we might all look slightly different, you know, if you're looking at where you are in the social hierarchy of this country, then that's where you're going to find the most common ground. I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much for that. I don't know if anyone else would like to contribute. So may help me if any hands raised, because I can't see everyone. Anyone else would like to come in? I think while we wait, I'd just like to raise the point that Mohammed, you talked about around visible solidarity. And I think this is one of the points that people are struggling with, said around without genuine change. But also thinking about how, okay, going back, the Black Lives Matter protest for someone who lives in rural areas, I have seen how it's really helped raise awareness of rural racism. Then the question becomes, there are people, and in this case, white middle class people, who didn't know that racism, not that they knew or ignored or not aware, I don't know what terminology being, the existence of racism, but now are quite keen to do something. For me, these are the people then, so they were talking about allyship. So the issue becomes, we want to be part of the solution. We want to support, we want to use our resources to be part of the solution. So the conversations then become what you said around solidarity, around, also for me, connects to issues of allyship. I know there's been people who've found it quite problematic to use this idea of allyship. So again, it brings those questions from not just racialized people, but also how we can include majority people who are keen, want to help, so we cannot discount those that have their heart in the right place, want to be part of the solution, and are asking, what can I do? So these are also people then we also need to think about in how can we bring them in the fore, how can we work with those people? so that we're able to address these issues. So for me, that's also something to think about. But also like what Duncan said around class. So we recognize, the intersections of class and race, and the importance, and all the other categories, gender, sexuality, religion, and culture, and all the other factors in the experiences of racism. So definitely need to recognize that. But of course, like we said, at the end of the day, as much as we recognize those differences and how we need to respect those differences, how then can we work together? I guess that is still going back to that question, because at the moment we have, these differences and these boundaries within groups and amongst the groups. So I just go to the chat. I'll quickly go through it before we move on. Oh guys, thank you, Tasmin. Thank you for attending. Thank you very much. Duncan, you've got the white middle class liberals, Grayson Perry Merton is Trump's America program and guide. Well-meaning middle classes are usually on board until they realize it requires them to give away or sacrifice their privilege or economic position. Then that becomes the challenge. I think we'll have these conversations for later on, because we need to bring in Martin as well. I'll just stop sharing. Thank you, Mohammed. That was really insightful. Hopefully we'll have more time to discuss them. And thank you, Duncan, for your input. I don't know if anyone else has any questions or we move on.
Yeah, and if anyone does have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and then Lorene and I can read them out for you. So that's something to remember during the course of this afternoon. Now, for those of you who are feeling the limbs going to sleep and your eyes aching as you look at the screen, it's time for a short 5-minute break where you can...
This meeting is being recorded.
Oh, sorry.
There's a ghost on the machine. Oh, I think, Mohammed, you need to put yourself on mute.
I have.
There's 2 of you right now. The joys of technology. So on that note, for anyone who wants to grab a cuppa or a cool drink, feel free. We have 5-minute break to stretch those limbs, blink your fabulous eyes, and then we'll come back to see Martin's performance. Such a technical voice. Right, so next we have Martin Glynn, who is many things: troublemaker, criminologist, poet, and artist, who's always emphasized undertaking innovative approaches to undertake research, but also putting the community at the heart of what he does and what others within academia and outside do. And he aims to undertake work and encourage others to undertake work that benefits and supports the community. So I'll hand it over to Martin, who's going to show his creativity.
Yeah, are you taking that 5-minute break slide off, or is it staying up there?
Lorraine.
Is Lorraine there? Oh, okay. Oh my God. People, I don't have a PowerPoint presentation. I'm just going to speak from the heart. I'm 64 this year, 3 kids, 5 grandkids, and a great-grandson. I've had 3 cousins murdered. About 4 weeks ago, we had a youth murdered in King's Standing. Yesterday, Dalian Atkinson's killer, PC Benjamin Monk, was found guilty. And today we get the Derek Chauvin decision. I'm the writer in residence at the National Justice Museum, and I'm writing a book on the Black presence in crime and punishment from 1750 to 1900. And I don't really want to cover what everybody else has said, because I want to just give my own position. As I go back to the Regency period, and I investigate court transcripts, and I go back to the Victorian period, what I'm amazed at is when we look at slavery and colonialism, they're not seen as crimes. They're not taught in criminology, and they're certainly not taught in sociology as crimes. So right now you're looking at the descendants of a slave. My ancestors, I went to Jamaica and traced my slave ancestry in Jamaica. So I'm a descendant of a slave. Michelle Alexander, the famous lawyer in America, said that racism has been redesigned. And if you study the history of slavery, I remember saying to my colleagues, tea, sugar, cotton, gold does not come from Birmingham or London. So from my perspective, I mean, my new book there, I really want to go on about the books, but I'm going to declare my position. I come from the Black community. I was raised, I'm 64 this year, I was raised in one of the last modern slums in a place called St. Anne's in Nottingham. It was terrible. My father was in the 1958 race riots. I've been through enough, seen a lot. I've been to Northern Ireland. I was in Germany when the Berlin Wall came down. I've campaigned against the death penalty and the Ku Klux Klan. And I'm still doing those things. The relevance of it is, and it echoes some of the things that have been said before. I don't really care about institutions. I know they're important, but from a Black person's perspective, we don't own a bank in this country. We don't control the NHS. We don't control the prison system or criminal justice. So therefore, we control and own very little. Like the previous speakers, when you take the civil rights movement in the States, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, human rights movement, even to this day, the prison population has increased exponentially and the violence with police exponentially since civil rights. We saw with the Vietnam protests, the anti-war process. I mean, if you're a student of history and oppression, I think Duncan's point is right. So the question is, if we can't change the institutions, what do we do? Well, in a minute, I'm going to perform a piece, because you see with me, I'm from streets. Yeah, I got my PhD, but I'm welded to the community, because one of the few communities that will go out and fight and take things on. And they don't do what Black Lives Matter. I remember Black Lives Matter and complaining about police kettling. Well, police procedure is if there's civil unrest, the police have to manage that reality. I've been through 5 riots, and they're not like they are now. They were much more dangerous, contentious. I also remember the Labour Party March for Jobs. And I remember somebody came to me and it's responding to Duncan's point, that said to me, I was performing poetry. And I remember saying that one of the problems is with history, it kind of forgets that a lot of white people, especially working class white people, have been miseducated the way Black people have. And I said that a lot of working class white people are racist. And I stood up there and said this in front of people marching, and the guy come and attacked me. And I said, you ask me why I have a problem sometimes in looking at class within the construct of race, because racism is expressed and articulated through all the structures. So therefore, when we look at the class differential, one of the things I said to a colleague when we come out of Brexit, who told me that slavery, working class people weren't complicit in slavery. And I said, which history are you talking about? So from my point of view, as coming from my background, I've used hip hop. In the last 4 years, we've had 100 million people connect to what I'm saying. And I'm going to perform a piece of my work in a minute. I created a research method. When I went into academia, and I went into academia in my 50s, I got a PhD in my late 50s, didn't like it. Didn't like doing the masters, but I did it for one reason. I went around the community and they said, yo, Martin, you want to make a difference, you have to sit around the table. So in the years that I've been in academia, my work's been done in the White House, number 10. So I've landed it. But the class differential is when society says, they refer to me as a black academic. So they don't give me a class definition for my academic gift. I'm called a black academic. It's racialized. So the reality of it is that I couldn't understand why I have to go to peer-reviewed journals when I couldn't get my work published. So I set out with a mission about 5 years ago to put my work into people's headphones. I'd studied Dr. Dre's Beats. So I thought, you know something, I'm going to put my work into headphones. Called it data verbalization. In the corporate sector, we have data visualization. It's the way that you graphically illustrate data. What I wanted to do, I wanted to speak it, but I wanted to speak it in a way that youths on the road understood it. Because you see, Duncan, I don't know where you're from, but if you study the history of urban riots, I remember back in the day when the white left would march at the front and we have to stand behind. But in the 80s, we changed that. Because I know for a fact from the miners' strike to all the riots I've been through, a lot of those people, those liberal commentators were commenting on my reality and they were nowhere to be seen when we were battered by the police. So I thought to myself, when I'm in uni, how do I deal with this? Because I've heard the decolonization of the curriculum, I've heard it all. But the moment I start putting my work on the streets, suddenly youths on the road, gang members, man's in jail, they start getting educated about ideas. Because one of the things I'm interested in is ideas. I'm interested in how people take ideas and adapt them and do something with them. And what I realize is novels, the African oral tradition is 40,000 years old, but the novel came late. But the benchmark for the way we present ideas is either novels, books. But my community is somebody from as a person of African descent. That's not how it is, it's the oral tradition. So what I realize is because of the experience of my children, my grandchildren, the community in education, they weren't fortunate enough to navigate the atrocities that's happened in education. So reading didn't become a big issue. So when I'm in jails, and I've spent 40 years working in jails, I see the hunger of people in jail. Right, we've got hip hop, drill, trap, grime. But one thing about the oral tradition, you can't break it. You don't seek permission to speak. But what's happened is by legislation has banned certain cultural word forms and art forms. So what I did, I was invited to the American Society of Criminology to give a keynote speech and I decided to stuff it. So I deconstructed it, put it to hip hop. What we did, we pulled a masterstroke. We knew Busta Rhymes. We sent it to Busta Rhymes. Within 2 weeks, we had 20 million people. That mobilized people. That went to Black Lives Matter. So what we learned is you take ideas and you put it on a form that people understand. If that's your constituency, things happen. Let's take George Floyd. Everybody's bigging up this thing, and you know something, today's going to get a big sentence, but it's the first one in a long time like this guy. It's disgraceful in the UK. One white police officer has been found guilty of an atrocious act. But the relevance of it is, when historians write about slavery, they kind of miss one thing. Slaves ended slavery with their sacrifice. So when you're talking about mobilizing people, I don't know what solidarity is, because racism, I'm not included in it. I'm the butt of people's ridicule and humor, jokes. Remember, in the last 30 years on TV, black and white minstrel show, all of the racist stuff we've seen on TV, suddenly we got a proliferation of black people on TV. Well, it's called interest convergence. It's now in the interest. We've suddenly become consumers. I played cricket. I'm 64, so I'm fortunate that Gary Sobers, that's when he hit 6 sixes with Malcolm Nash, I was allowed to keep the ball in my house for a week. I was the mascot for the Barbados touring team back in the 1960s with Wes Hall, Charlie Griffith, Lance Gibbs. And I played for a Caribbean team for years, and I can always tell you, when we used to go to mining villages, the fights that would break out over cricket. So for me, I don't know what solidarity is, so it's not something that I promote. What I do know is what opposition is. What I do know is about revolution. What I do know is about change. What I do believe is every individual has to search their own conscience and take their own position. Therefore, I'm not going to tell anybody what they must do. It's up to them. I just know in the constituency I come from what they will do. And one thing I can say about the tail end, they're consistent. You stress the tail end and it bites. Where I have a problem is gifted and talented people who talk cricket from the boundary, not from the crease. I've faced West Indies bowlers as fast as Michael Holding, and trust me, when you get a ball coming at 100 miles an hour, it's very easy on the crease to say, yo, you should use your bat. Well, I know when I was taught Caribbean cricket, I was taught you got a bat. That's why we never used to wear helmets. There's a guy called Colin Milburn, used to play for Northampton. He was the first person that when he got hit with a ball, took his eye out and nearly killed him. That's when they brought helmets in. But the reality of it is, when you look at Bodyline, hitting players with the ball, it didn't start with black people, it started with Howard Larwood. So from my point of view, everybody just has to take their position and do what they can do. If you can raise your kids and stop them getting in trouble, do it. If you can mobilize a group of students in school to stay in school, do it. But the idea that somehow there's going to be this unification, it would never happen in the Industrial Revolution. It never happened during slavery because we had house and field slaves. It never happened during colonialism. So there's no period in my history from you had the pharaohs in Egypt where you can demonstrate that solidarity, which somehow, and I like the point that that was made with Mohammed. I've seen the black square. Since the year in the pandemic, me being a black man trying to wear a mask, I know what you feel like when they put a mask on and they walk into a shop. I've had that and I still get it. When I first put a mask on, they looked like I was going to rob a shop. Second time I wore a mask, nobody wore one because the rules were relaxed and they thought I was going to rob a shop. And then when Black Lives Matter come, my wife made me a mask with African print material, said, come across as more acceptable. So I put it on and they all thought I was in Black Lives Matters. And I've got a PhD, I'm super qualified, a worldwide reputation, and yet, do I feel any different from my ancestors? No. So what I'm going to do for you now is to show you what makes me different. And I'm not bragging about it, but in light of what Duncan said, I mean, yeah, I've got books. I've got all my books here. I've got 4 books, 3 by Routledge and 1 Bristol. But it makes no difference. I don't read my books. They're not for that. They're for that. They're my legacy for the next generation in other people's literature reviews. They're not for me. I got a great grandson. And as Malcolm X said, either part of the problem or part of the solution. So this is how I deal with it. So when people talk about how do you get a lot of people, I'll show you how I do it. And I wrote this 40 years ago, 40. And if you can tell me this is any different, I'd like you to tell me if it's any, I'm telling you it's 40 years ago, so you understand. I didn't write it last week. I can take you to a place where people don't like walking. You have to watch your step in the area you are talking. You don't have the money, so you have to hustle. You need a clever brain and not a rippling muscle. Pushing or you're selling involved in prostitution. The muggers, pimps and pushers become an institution. Mashing up on crack, calm your brain on weed, ripping off your people filled with foolish greed. One parent, family mothers, a new bought pram. In the evening, leave the children to make the party ram. Sexual promiscuity, the debt is being paid. Dying very slowly, the price you get is AIDS. Learn to shoot a pistol, know how to survive. Raving in the party till the policemen they arrive. I can take you to a place where you can see high rise, where suicide is normal and never brings surprise, where filth and dirty living still rear the ugly head. There's nothing to get up for, so you stay most days in bed. You sign on once a fortnight, the dough you were getting, and if it don't come, you really start sweating. People stay indoors, they don't go out at night because they're frightened of a beating, a dying in a fight. It's a hopeless situation, submerged in the crap. Society makes the rules, you get caught in the trap. You can find a way out because you think you're a man. You need some hustling money, so you formulate a plan. You meet up with your friends, decide to do a job. You put your minds together because you're gonna rob. In the panic of the robbery, another man lay dead. Yet another pressure to put inside your head. It's the type of situation that most of us ignore. It's expanding every day and could even reach your door. Now, to understand my rhyme, you really must be willing to think before you act. By that, I mean chilling. I know you are frustrated and life is complicated, but prison ain't no good because you'll get separated from your family and your friends, your children and your lover. And with a long sentence, she's due to find another. Fighting is the course we all have to pursue, but robbery ain't the answer. There's other things to do like education, independence, learning and achievement, bettering yourself. These things are important to the freedom and the justice that is owed to you and me. This is written by our people in our history. Freedom fighting is the answer, and not just selfish greed. You need it in the struggle to follow or to lead. The principle is simple, say the future may be grim. Fight the system or sink or swim. An action, a reaction can bring no satisfaction when money is the motive, the fatal attraction. So, the seeds of change are blowing. If society keeps going, rebellion will come as the youths are now showing. So when I stand on a street corner outside and I got a bag of youths and they got knives and guns, they'll listen to that because that's the voice. Why? Because if I don't listen to them and get them to stand still, they go in jail. They're making the next victim. And my argument is when you can stand in front of a group of gunmen, when you can sit there stopping a riot, when you get 1,000 people, as I remember being in Hyde Park, 20,000 black people, and I'm with the Broadwater Farm Collective on the back of a truck, and the police surrounded it, ready to riot. I had to use my poetry to stop 10,000 black people rebelling. The police surrounded Hyde Park. So for me, just in conclusion, that's why I say I don't want to go over what everybody else has said because I think there's merit in all of it. But this is about doing. COVID-19 has just locked everything off. But you know something? We're going back out. We've seen the rise of the far right. Marie-Jean Le Pen, she's back having a conversation. Donald Trump's operating like he's in the dark web behind the scenes. Right now, across Muslim countries around the world, they're asking a question, what's happening in Israel? So when you put it into a global context, black and brown people are in the majority. But the reality of it is, we're in a climate of fear. People are scared. That's why it's easy to chat on a screen. It's easy to stand there and be rhetorical. From my perspective, as I said, 64, there's just some things that's worth dying for. I don't want to die, like nobody wants to die. But the question is, we're all going to die. What do you want to die for? And the point is, I look at it, they're sending people onto space, but people in Brazil, they're not getting, the poor people in Brazil, they're not getting access to space technology. So I look at it, just to complement what's been said. C.L.R. James, one of the greatest writers ever around cricket, used it as a metaphor for understanding nationalism, socialism. I remember in Yorkshire, when if you were not Yorkshire, you could not play for Yorkshire, which meant there were black people in Yorkshire that couldn't play, who were told, well, you're not Yorkshire because your parents are from another country. And I remember people like Jeff Boycott, Freddie Truman. I just remember them all. So I look at it and I just want to repeat my thing. I don't have an axe to grind no more. I'm a freed slave. I walked off the plantation, and I'm not talking about academia. What I'm saying is slaves are slave. And I look at it this way. How slaves get a little bit of comfort, field slaves, they get wet in the rain in the field. But one thing about field slaves, they know they're oppressed, but they're going to make you pay for it if you're part of that situation. So I look at it, we're either part of the problem, part of the solution. What I love about what Loreen and Somi is trying to do, they're trying to create a conversation. Me, I've moved beyond the conversation because right now the streets are saying, yo, Martin, I can't deal with this no more. So really, what's changed? We don't have gatekeepers in the community I come from. We have people who influence, and some of us are clever in the influence. Malcolm X taught me one thing. He said a lot of white people are racist, and I emphasize racist. They don't like black men, but they hate intelligent black men even worse. And when you come from my background, you're public enemy number one. So I look at it, I don't have anything to win, lose, or gain. What I will say is history will show. And that's what my mum said, history will show that when it comes to insurrection and change, my constituency are seasoned at it, seasoned. If Derek Chauvin does not get 30-year minimum, let me tell you what's going to happen in Baltimore, Chicago. In this country, if anything happened to me, there'll be an upheaval in the jails. So I look at it, we're all wanting struggle from a comfortable concept. Well, read Cuban Revolution, study the French Revolution. What we've got is technology driving a third industrial revolution. And if you know what happened in the second industrial revolution, it wasn't good for black people. So I look at it, and I'm not a lawyer, but I'm going to rest my case because for me, the past few weeks has been rough. We've had murders, we've had kidnaps, and we're talking about it. And that the front news of the Sun, we've got Matt Hancock kissing somebody. Give me a break. So I look at it. Mum used to say, don't get mad, get even. So the best thing I could have done is get a PhD with a street background because that scares people. So I want to say thanks to Duncan Mohammed. And I think what I'd say to you, Duncan, is this. Working class white people have been put upon for years. And in putting on working class white people, they've put it on me. Therefore, I don't hate them. I'm not this, you know what I mean? Tommy Robinson and them people, they're just the way they are. You understand? I get it. Not only do I accept that class is important, but as a black man, when I get hit by a policeman or he calls me a nigger, he's not calling it, that's not a class-based term. So my point being is our unification is accepting and respecting the different positions we uphold. The fact that you're out there writing books, the fact that you got sacked from uni, I don't like that. But there just comes a moment when we have to pick and choose the battles we want to fight. You want my support, then ask me what I want. Ask me what I need. You're not just going to get it because on the basis we think we're somehow unified. But if you turn around and said to me, would I promote your book to a group of black people? Yes, because they love cricket. Would I stand up with Mohammed and say, yo, Michael Holding is about interest convergence, it's the right time? Yeah. But then the moment I say to you, look, we need to go out into the street, chair, there's a shoot, somebody's been shot, and there's a bag of mans there and they're all ready to go on a rampage, you need to stand next to me when that happens too, because you've got what you want. And that's why I said, don't get it twisted. I'm not liberal. I'm very forgiving. I'm very loving. But with what you're saying, let's not forget the victims of all of this. And we are victims and casualties, but I'm not going to play the victim and I'm not going to play the casualty. And that's why I said with Somia and I don't normally do stuff like this because I just find it irritating. But like Rosa Parks, sometimes you sit on the front of the bus and something amazing happens. So you sometimes come on in a moment like this and you meet interesting people. But I'm just trying to show you where I'm coming from, that whether I'm speaking academically or hip hop, trust me. So all it takes for somebody like me is to make one phone call. That's it. So with great responsibility, with power, leadership comes great responsibility. And I'm very responsible. I don't want people to get hurt, but it's like anything. In jail, you have a negotiation. So I'd come to a man like you, Duncan, and say, look, 5 ways we can talk about this. Get off my foot, please. Get off my foot, off. And then the 5th one, there's no conversation because I've given you 4 opportunities. So for me, I don't really want any questions for people to pose. You might want some thoughts about it. I just want to say thank you for Duncan. Don't give up your cause. You're an academic, you're just not in the building. That doesn't define you. Academics are somebody that's got a brain, thought, ideas. Einstein was an academic. It's not relevant to me unless you're looking at a plane. You see it speeding, think, why is it going so slow? What I'm saying is it's okay to be you and to represent you. So therefore, you don't have to be in solidarity with my issue. You just have to take care of your business. And likewise with Mohammed. I stopped playing cricket because I broke my leg in it. I was a semi-professional cricketer and it broke my leg. And I never recovered from it. I hated it because I've never been able to play cricket from I mashed up my foot when I was 17. That's nearly 50 years ago. But it taught me a valuable lesson that your life can change in the blink of an eye. So I look at it, my life's not relevant anymore. It's what I leave behind. It's about legacy. So all I want to say is to Somia, you guys, this is what it's about. It's about going back to wherever we are, incentivizing people, not apologizing, doing whatever needs to get done. People may vote for it, but even the suspect, that community is suspect, the voting community with Brexit and what it did for the country. So I'm going to stop there, but my passion is because what I realize is what's happening in the last 6 months is I know clearly what I've got to do. And that means that's a big decision. But the reality of it is I'm through with talking. I'm through with negotiation. What I'm about is to create those spaces and that mobilization through music, through art, through sport, whatever, because that's where the vast majority of people are, whether it's in a fast food restaurant, a nail salon, a dumpling shop, wherever it needs to be, because that's what the British Radical Society did. But they all got hung in the Cato Street conspiracy. So we also have to be shrewder in the way that we want to incentivize change, because if you're black and brown or working class and white, you'll go in jail. And therefore, those of us who know better can do better. So listen, that's it. Done. Stop. Thank you. Thank you, Duncan. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Anyway, Somia, it's back to you guys, yeah?
Thank you for that, Martin. You and Mohammed combined have definitely given us a lot of food for thought, individually and as a collective. So thank you very much. And I think what we should do is move on to the discussion, Lorraine. Let them have a discussion once we've done this, because I think it's one thing is I think we want to hear everyone's voices and those.
But listen, people, I have to go. I've got an emergency I've got to deal with. So I'm going to love you and leave you. Yeah. I'm really sorry about that, but it's something I got to deal with.
No, that's great. Thank you so much, Martin. Thank you.
Can I
Thank you.
from either one of the ladies, please?
Say again.
Can I get one of your details of one of the kind ladies?
Yeah, what I suggest is,
Yes, we
get the
will.
details.
Yeah.
And likewise, Duncan, yeah. For my thing is, I don't care whether you could be gay, you could be super rich. It makes no difference to me. It's not that difference doesn't matter. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is if you're down with something, be down with it and live with the consequences. And you've got to trust that if I bring you in front of a group of gang members, from you're with me, they're cool with you. And likewise, if you bring me into the East End of London into a pub and I have to go and talk to people, I'm going to trust that you're going to give me safe passage. So at the end of the day, that's what solidarity is, not carping about somebody else's difference that I don't agree with them. Because no, if you was gay and somebody beat you with a stick, I don't want you to get beaten with a stick. So therefore, I'm going to stand against the violence of beating someone because they are who they are, and you beat them with a stick. But I don't have to be gay to do that. And you don't have to be black to stand next to me when I'm getting racism. And I don't have to be a Muslim to be able to support someone when I see somebody get their hijab pulled off, because I'm a citizen of the world and I've had enough oppression to last me more than so we've got to lead in a different way. And all I'm saying is, so that's what for me solidarity is about, is when we come together like sticks, we're unbreakable. And if we get hurt, we get hurt because we did something wrong. But I don't want to get hurt because I like my face. So listen, people, Somia, Lorraine, and everybody else, I'm off. All right, take care.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Martin.
Bye.
Yeah. Okay, bye. Yeah. Just to say, we will share. Obviously, it's given us permission. If you give us permission, yeah, we will share the contact.
Yeah. So Duncan, if you can send us your email, we can forward the details to Martin's details to you, and Mohammed already have yours. So
Yeah, including the others on this conversation.
Yeah.
If anyone is
Yeah.
like to connect,
So
please.
Nick,
please
Salma,
connect.
if you do want details, let us know either via chat or just by verbalizing, and we can send that to everyone. It's the same if you want to share, for example, your Twitter handles, feel free to do so. Brilliant, thank you. But yeah, so I think considering everything that Mohammed and Martin have said and the questions they have, the questions they have raised, I think it's important to give space for everyone to share their thoughts and how they're feeling right now. And considering some of the questions on the slide, but also looking at how Mohammed, Martin have highlighted the issues with terms such as solidarity, envisioning it and what it means, and the tensions that exist in that regard, which I think are really important. And considering how each of us can do something actively in the everyday in order to create ripples that matter rather than just talking about it. So the fact that action matters and continuing it even as we may meet hurdles or very likely will. So what I'm going to do is pause the recording so we can all talk comfortably, although we have been doing that, but just so everyone feels comfortable. So I'm going to